I've been making the point that markets and generally the investment community wants policy certainty. To the extent that President Ramaphosa has been re-elected, it provides them with that continuity and policy certainty, and are assured that the structural reforms that the President was implementing will continue.
Speaking about the stability around policy, one of the issues that was raised during the President's political report was the one on land reform, and then also the issue around the nationalization of the Reserve Bank. How do you see that conversation going on in commissions today?
Now, all of those items are always standing item on the agenda. Let me just give the Reserve Bank. There has been a very contestation over what the Reserve Bank must focus on. In particular, whether within its mandate it should not include employment. To deal with this debate, then, the Minister of Finance at the time, Minister Pravin Gordhan, wrote a letter to then Governor Jill Marcus, and said, guys, these are the things we should also take into consideration. I'm making this history in order to understand how this debate has been flowing. In the last conference, the decision was taken to nationalize the Reserve Bank. You will see that we prefaced that with a sentence that says, it's a historical anomaly. That's what we said. Why did we say it's a historical anomaly? It's precisely because after the Second World War, all central banks were nationalized except 2 or 3 in the world. So that the failure that it was nationalized in South Africa, we saw that as a historical anomaly. We then agreed that the Reserve Bank must be nationalized, but we end that resolution with something that says, in the process of doing that, we should not enrich speculators. So, subsequent to that, a number of developments have taken place which, if we were to implement that resolution in its present form, we would end up spending more money than the resources of the economy can afford. And as a result, it would undermine the very resolution which said we should not enrich speculators.
When you mean spending more money, what sort of figures were you looking at?
Let me just say there are people who want, there's people who are driving this agenda. Some of them are outside the ANC. Some of them are shareholders. Now, there's an evaluation of the Reserve Bank. If you evaluate the Reserve Bank force in terms of the share price, you've got 2 million shareholders multiplied by 10,000, which is currently the best. That would mean roughly a walk in the park. We can nationalize the Reserve Bank with our eyes closed. But if you were to say you are evaluating the bank in terms of including its asset base, the number is between 50 and 70 billion. Now you've got to make policy choices whether you spend that 50 or 70 billion rand in acquiring the Reserve Bank, or I take part of it and pay the 350 and pay off it and put it into NAFSAs. Those are the choices we've got to make.
So as it stands currently, what would your recommendation be?
My recommendation,
nationalize the
my recommendation is not to say let's undermine the resolution, but we must say we must do so when the resources of the country are sufficient enough that we can be able to do so.
Okay, so the shareholdership is one part, but then there's also the issue around the mandate of the Reserve Bank.
Even that debate, in my view, I tend to be misplaced. What is the mandate of the Reserve Bank in terms of the Constitution? The mandate of the Reserve Bank in terms of the Constitution is for the Reserve Bank to maintain price stability in the interest of a balanced growth, not for the sake of it. So what that means is that the Reserve Bank has got to make sure that in managing that price stability balances that with all other economic variables in order to ensure a balanced growth. So that mandate is broad enough to give all the effects people are talking about, including employment, taking those things into account. Now, the question that arises, What do? Do you go and tell the Monetary Policy Committee to do what? Then you confronted with that resolution, you are also confronted with the mandate of the Reserve Bank, we're also confronted with the independence of the Reserve Bank. So we've got to manage all of those things as we do this debate.
After this election, I am sure you are very happy, particularly looking at the coming BRICS summit next year. South Africa is going to host the summit. The president coming back, what will be the approach? At the G20 also, a critical one, the president is pushing for the AU to be a permanent member of the G20. So what can we expect next year? Vigorous international campaigning?
We aggressively, we've developed a program and our themes and our agenda as chair of the BRICS next year. We've set up working streams to look into that, my team work on the finance stream. So we're excited that we'll be chairing BRICS next year, and having President Ramaphosa will ensure continuity of the discussion we've had. We're also excited that in 2025 we'll take over the presidency of the G20. That's why we've got to win in 2024.
Okay. So in terms of the G20,
it's
Minister,
2025.
As you build up to G20 2025, when you look at the global economy, when you listen to what the UN Secretary General said, there should be a compact in terms of the developed countries and the developing nations. At the G20 in Bali, do you think this did find traction within member states?
Let me just say what is important about the G20. My reading of it is quite a powerful institution. And most of the policies we adopt in the G20 simply get implemented by IMF and the World Bank and all the multinational institutions. In that sense, it's quite a powerful institution. For instance, if you look at the debt initiative, the framework G20 of debt relief, it's a decision that emerged from the G20 and is being implemented in Paris Club by everybody. So it's quite a powerful institution for us to be using it. So I'm saying, in that sense, it's quite an important institution.
A final one from my end, Minister. The basic income grant, also part of the deliberations here at the conference. Do we have the money?
Look, we at the moment have penciled in the 350. We have penciled in for 2023-24, for 2024-25. If you ask me, although we have said is it going to come to an end into next one, extended by a year, I'm a realistic a politician. There's no likelihood we are going to go to an election and people say cut it out. That's not going to happen. But my sense is that it may find permanence, in which case it can evolve as becoming a basic income grant.
The 350 will find permanency.
I'm not saying it's going to be, but it may, depending on how we discuss the thing and move forward, to use it as a base for the basic income grant.
The issue of financing the just energy transition. You said the other day that you are not impressed by, the current project between World Bank and the Komati. What did you mean?
No, all I'm not saying it's not an important project, but I'm saying in terms of the benefits, employment and income, it's less attractive than the coal mine that was there and the coal power station. That's why I take the argument further and say what is going to be necessary if we're going to go that route is also to look at the alternative development model, which will make sure that the people that are being displaced can also find employment elsewhere.